Feraligatr is my favorite of the starter Pokemon, mainly because in Gen 2 you could completely solo the story of the game as long as Feraligatr knew Bite and Ice Punch, but also like it for its design. A bipedal crocodile is pretty badass, plus you can't ignore those butt humps. But when it comes to the TCG, Feraligatr has had a surprisingly limited run, especially for a Gen 2 Pokemon, especially for a Gen 2 starter Pokemon. The Gen 2 starters aren't used nearly as much as all other generation starter Pokemon, as if you just look through the TCG, Feraligatr doesn't have a Mega, there's no Level X, no GX, no regional form, no tag team, and only one reprint, and that's pretty recent. So let's take a look at each Feraligatr card printed thus far, and see what kind of TCG history the Gator has had. Feraligatr got its TCG debut in Neo Genesis. For the English release, we got two Feraligatrs in Genesis, both with Ken Sugimori artwork. I'll start with the Berserk Feraligatr, the lesser used of the two, and the far less known. It did see some competitive play, as you could abuse that Berserk Pokemon power by devolving Feraligatr and re-evolving it multiple times, which would basically just mill your opponent's deck down to nothing, and they would lose by deck out. The far more famous, or should I say infamous, Feraligatr is the Downpour Riptide Feraligatr from Neo Genesis. This thing had more HP, it didn't have any consistent counters, and with the synergy between its Pokemon power and its Riptide attack, you could deal massive damage starting on turn 3. And the balance of this card was supposed to be that after using Riptide, you would have to shuffle back in all those water energy so you couldn't deal that massive damage again next turn. But thanks to the trainer's Trash Exchange and Misty's Wrath, you could absolutely abuse Riptide. You could keep a large number of water energy in your discard and consistently just pound your opponent with Riptides every single turn. This allowed Riptide decks to absolutely dominate the Rocket On format. Feraligatr was the deck to beat. Over half of decks in Top Cut at official events were Riptide Feraligatr decks. Even into the Neo On format, when Trash Exchange and Misty's Wrath had rotated, Riptide Feraligatr decks were still prominent in play, as it found a new partner in Revelation Parasect. As long as you had a Parasect on your bench, your discard pile would be completely unaffected by Riptide, meaning that those water energies stayed put, and that Riptide attack would remain powerful turn after turn. Thankfully, in Neo On, you did have some prominent grass types show up, like Meganium and Exeggutor, that could OHKO Feraligatr, and so it was a little bit scared to see play in Neo On, though it was still a very powerful deck. But that doesn't mean that Neo On was completely safe from Feraligatr, as it wasn't even the most popular in that format. Instead, it was Dark Feraligatr from Neo Destiny. Baby Pokemon were everywhere in the Neo sets, and thankfully Dark Feraligatr showed up and made decks use less of them, to rely on them less and actually rely on the Pokemon in the deck, the full-blown attackers, which was really great for the metagame in my opinion. The decks that were able to stand up to Dark Feraligatr were those like Steelix or Kingdra or Donphan that didn't really have to rely on Cleffa for consistency. But Dark Feraligatr was a powerhouse in its own right. Dealing 50 damage for 3 water energy is not bad at all, but you also have a chance to discard an energy, which was pretty rare for Pokemon in Neo On. It was commonly paired with Genesis Noctowl for one of the Knocklock variants, as Scare could completely lock down babies, Crushing Blow could deal damage and potentially discard an energy, and Noctowl's Glaring Gaze could potentially reshuffle a trainer from your opponent's hand. Potentially a lot of disruption going on during your turn. In one single format, you had 3 competitively viable Feraligatr decks. A fantastic start for Feraligatr, but sadly this is also peak Feraligatr. Expedition Feraligatr was also part of the Neon format, but it was kind of the 4th wheel Gator. It couldn't really stand on its own, but it was used in a lot of Feraligatr decks as kind of the 4th Feraligatr, where you could combo it with Double Gust to bring it into the active position, get another free Double Gust with Major Tsunami, and that just gave you another tool for manipulating your opponent's side of the field, and a way for your attacking Feraligatrs to kind of wiggle around some special conditions. Props to that sweet Arita artwork though. There was another expedition Feraligatr, but as you can see, there's not really a lot to talk about here. It's much more of a theme deck kind of Pokemon card, which is sadly foretelling for Feraligatr in the TCG. The next Feraligatr came in EX Unseen Forces, and was basically just another theme deck card. And I really do not like the artwork in this. It leans a little bit too much towards Digimon for my taste, where its fingers and its stance are a little too human, and strays away from that original design a little too far. The main gator in Unseen Forces was Feraligatr EX, and for the EX era, it was fine. It wasn't great. It was pretty much completely overshadowed by Blastoise EX, but I have a personal highlight with this card that always makes me remember it fondly. I went to the Kentucky State Championships for the Pokemon TCG, and in round 1, I sit down across from my opponent at the designated table, and he's a 40-ish year old dude, and I'm a junior in high school, so I'm about 16 at this point. And he is very confident in his chances to win the state championships. He asked me what deck I'm running, and I said Flareon. He starts laughing and says, "Oh, well, this is going to be a short round." So the match begins, and I go first. I lay down an Eevee and a Spinarak, and turn passes to him. He turn 1 rare candies into Feraligatr EX. He's confident that he is going to completely sweep me because Flareon is weak to water. If you're not familiar with Feraligatr, basically, I got my full setup on turn 2. I got Full Flame Stadium in play. I evolved my Ariados. It was in the active position. I evolved my Eevee on the bench into Flareon EX, which burned and confused the Feraligatr EX. I then attack with Ariados for 70 damage. He takes 40 damage between turns for burn. On his turn, he flips for confusion and damages himself, and then dies to burn between turns. I win the game, 4 prizes to 6. So if you can take away a couple of lessons from Feraligatr EX, it should be that type advantage isn't always going to win you matches, and you should never roll up to a tournament with a Feraligatr EX deck and think you're going to sweep the competition before you've played a single round. I ended up not making it to top cut in that tournament either. I ended up losing to Mutrick, BLS, and a Ho-Oh EX deck. On to Dragon Frontiers, where we got another theme deck Feraligatr, but this time this one's actually fun as hell to play with. You could splash it into a ton of different Delta Species decks because you really wanted it for Battle Aura and Drag Off, so you don't really have to put it in an electric deck, but you could deal super effective damage with Drag Off to any Pokemon that was weak to electric. And I've mentioned before on the channel, this is the specific card that actually got me back into competitive play and deck building after I went on a long hiatus from the TCG. I stopped playing around the time Neo Discovery came out and didn't really get back into competitive playing until I saw this card, and it blew my mind. Delta Species was such a great gimmick. It was so much fun to build decks with Delta Species and different EX cards. So for that reason, this mediocre card will always have a place in my heart. Chugging right along into the Diamond and Pearl era, we got another Gator in Mysterious Treasures. Now this one actually had a pretty fun archetype. As you can probably guess, it involved using Energy Cyclone over and over again, and utilizing a lot of different trainers and supporters to fill your hand up with as many energy cards as possible. That way, every turn, you could score a KO with Energy Cyclone. You could deal some massive damage with Energy Cyclone, but it still didn't stack up to the heavy power creep that was really happening in the Diamond and Pearl era with decks like Scizor, Plox, Infercaddy, and just straight up Empoleon decks that could snipe your Totodiles. So while a very fun card to use, it ended up being more of a tier 2 archetype, whereas it just below that cutoff of being tournament worthy. In Heart Gold and Soul Silver, we got another decent kind of mid-tier theme deck level Feraligatr, which did have an alternate art version that was reprinted in Call of Legends. The cards aren't great, but the artwork is. These two cards probably have my favorite Feraligatr artworks that I've seen on any official product. But HGSS did not leave Feraligatr high and dry. It did get Feraligatr Prime, which saw the return of Rain Dance, which is a huge surprise that it would be given to Feraligatr, because this is back to base set level shenanigans. And this is even better than Blastoise EX Energy Rain. Sadly, even with something as OP as Rain Dance, Feraligatr didn't really have a lot it could do with it. Hydro Crunch, yeah, the energy cost doesn't really matter because you can lay down as many water energy as you want, but it still isn't that great of an attack. So even a Feraligatr Prime build would have still fallen into like a tier 2 deck for that metagame. It got reprinted as a Black Star promo with some English exclusive artwork, so that's something. In Phantom Forces, Feraligatr was right back into theme decks with the Bolt Twister theme deck. Nothing really noteworthy about this one. Same for the Shining Legends Feraligatr, which was printed pretty much just for the Lapras GX theme deck. So we come full circle, where the latest Feraligatr that has seen print is a reprint of the first Feraligatr that saw print from Neo Genesis. This is the Dragon Majesty Feraligatr, and it's a pretty good study in power creep. As you can see, since Neo Genesis, the card has needed several updates just to be considered a little bit competitive. So it's got 20 more HP, its Downpour Pokemon power is actually exactly the same, but Riptide costs 1 less energy, which is huge, and does 20 damage for every extra water energy in the discard instead of 10. So essentially, you take a Pokemon that completely dominated an entire format and was considered unbeatable, and you make it twice as powerful for less energy, and in the modern era, it's still going to get stomped by EX, GX, or even other Stage 2 cards. I am glad that this Feraligatr got reprinted because it is a quintessential competitive card when you're looking at the history of the Pokemon TCG, but it is a reminder of how far this power creep has come and how kind of busted the TCG is now. As far as the TCG history of Feraligatr as a whole goes, it had a very strong start. Some of the most powerful cards of the early Pokemon TCG were all Feraligatrs. You had 3 Feraligatr archetypes in one single format, but as time moved forward, new games were released, more new Pokemon needed to be printed into the TCG, and the Gen 2 starters especially dropped off heavily. They were pretty much forgotten about, and I think they'll remain that way. From what I can tell, the Gen 2 starters are the least popular of all starter Pokemon, and so I don't see a good Feraligatr card getting printed again until we see new games that feature Feraligatr, like a Let's Go Elekid and Magby, or whatever those Gen 2 Let's Go games gonna be. In summation, he was a Gator Boy. She said, "See you later, boy." He wasn't good enough for her.